Have you ever noticed how the person who seems least interested is often the one who captures everyone's attention? Why is it that we're magnetically drawn to those who remain just beyond our reach, while those who make themselves constantly available fade into the background of our lives? The answer lies in one of the most powerful psychological principles Machiavelli understood centuries ago, one that still shapes human dynamics today. In a world where everyone is desperately seeking attention, those who strategically withhold it possess extraordinary influence. Has this ever happened to you? You meet someone who reveals just enough of themselves to be intriguing, yet maintains an air of mystery that leaves you thinking about them long after the interaction ends. Meanwhile, those who eagerly share everything about themselves within minutes create no lasting impression. This is no accident. It's the psychology of fascination at work. What you're about to discover might surprise you. The most desirable people aren't those who give the most access to themselves. They're those who transform their presence into a rare commodity. When you make yourself constantly available, responding to every message immediately, accepting every invitation, sharing every thought and feeling, you unconsciously train others to value you less. The truth is unsettling but undeniable. Humans don't value what comes easily. We obsess over what we can't fully possess or understand. This is why mystery creates such a powerful magnetic force. When someone can't quite read you, can't predict your next move, or can't access you whenever they want, you occupy significantly more mental real estate in their mind. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Stay with me until the end, because I'm going to reveal the exact psychological tactics that transform you from someone people take for granted into someone they can't stop thinking about. These aren't manipulative tricks. They're ancient principles of human psychology that have governed social dynamics since the beginning of civilization. Think of it this way. Your time, attention, and emotional presence are valuable currencies. Most people give these away freely, as if they cost nothing. But what happens when you begin treating access to you as something that must be earned rather than freely given? Something remarkable shifts in how others perceive and respond to you. The first principle we must understand is what I call strategic inaccessibility. This doesn't mean becoming a recluse or cutting off all contact. Rather, it means carefully cultivating an aura of selectivity around your presence. When you stop being easy to reach, people begin to value the moments when they do have your attention. They begin to recognize that your focus is a gift, not an entitlement. If you want to master these psychological tactics and transform how others perceive you, hit that subscribe button now. I share powerful insights that most will never discover. When you limit your access in this way, you create the foundation for an even more powerful technique. Strategic disappearance. This isn't about ghosting or abandoning connections. It's about creating deliberate space that transforms how others perceive you. When you suddenly become unavailable after establishing a pattern of selective presence, you create a psychological vacuum that others can't help but fill with thoughts of you. This mindset shift represents one of the hidden truths of human psychology. Absence often creates a stronger impact than presence. Think about it. When someone who normally responds within certain parameters suddenly goes silent, what happens? The mind begins spinning narratives, wondering what changed, where you might be, what you might be doing. This mental investment in you happens automatically, without you having to do anything except step back. But the journey toward becoming someone others can't stop thinking about goes deeper than physical presence. It's also about emotional self-control, perhaps the most powerful revelation in Machiavelli's arsenal of influence. Every emotional reaction you provide in response to provocation becomes a roadmap for others to navigate your psychology. Each time you show anger, frustration, jealousy, or even excessive enthusiasm, you're essentially handing someone the keys to your internal state. The transformation occurs when you recognize that emotions aren't just feelings, they're levers that others pull to manipulate your behavior. The person who maintains composure while everyone else reacts emotionally becomes the gravitational center of every interaction. This isn't about suppressing your authentic self. It's about choosing which parts of yourself you allow others to see and when. Behind the scenes of every provocative comment, every attempt to bait you into reaction, lies a simple truth. They're fishing for evidence that they matter enough to affect your emotional state. When you react strongly, you've surrendered power. You've confirmed that they have the ability to reach inside you and flip switches at will. Instead, practice becoming the silent observer. Maintain steady eyes that reveal nothing, a level tone that gives away no inner turbulence, an unbroken pace that suggests complete self-possession. What you'll discover is that your calm becomes more unsettling to others than any outburst could ever be. Your stillness creates a mirror that forces them to confront their own emotional reactivity. This practice requires dedication to develop, but the impact on how others perceive you is immediate and profound. When someone realizes they cannot easily disturb your emotional equilibrium, they begin approaching you differently, with more consideration, more thought, more care. They recognize, often unconsciously, that the usual tools of social manipulation simply don't work on you. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how these principles create a fascinating psychological phenomenon. When your silence becomes more powerful than words could ever be. Type, "I am the observer, not the reactor," in the comments if you're starting to see how these principles could transform your interactions. What emerges from this practice of emotional control is something truly remarkable. A transformation in how others perceive your silence. When you consistently remain composed under circumstances that would cause most people to react emotionally, people begin to fear your silence more than they would ever fear your anger. This represents a fundamental shift in the power dynamic. Think about the journey this creates in others' minds. They realize that your calm doesn't signify passivity or weakness, quite the opposite. Your stillness signals that you're thinking, watching, analyzing the situation from a position of complete self-possession. This calculated restraint creates an aura around you that feels both magnetic and slightly intimidating, filled with unpredictable potential. The mindset behind this approach is what Machiavelli might call emotional frost, a state that, unlike hot-blooded aggression which burns out quickly, can be maintained indefinitely. This is one of the most profound revelations about human dynamics. Sustainable power doesn't come from explosive outbursts, but from measured, controlled responses that leave others guessing. When people cannot predict your emotional reactions, they begin walking cautiously around you, not because you've threatened them or displayed aggression, but precisely because you haven't. The uncertainty about how you might respond creates natural leverage without requiring you to exert obvious force. They become hyper-aware of your boundaries, careful not to overstep, attentive to your subtle cues in ways they never would be with someone whose reactions are completely predictable. Behind the scenes of this dynamic lies a deeper truth about human psychology. We instinctively respect what we cannot easily categorize or control. Your emotional composure places you outside the normal patterns most people follow, making you inherently more intriguing and, yes, more respected. But the full spectrum of Machiavellian influence extends beyond mere presence and emotional control. Sometimes, the most decisive power move isn't confrontation at all. It's strategic absence. When you remove yourself from situations where others have come to expect your presence, You create a disruption in their sense of control and predictability. Your absence becomes as meaningful as your presence once was, perhaps even more so. It creates disorientation and uncertainty, forcing others to reconsider the dynamics they had taken for granted. This isn't about being petty or playing games. It's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful position is to simply not be where others expect you to be, creating space for them to feel your influence through the void you've left. The impact of strategic absence works because humans are naturally uncomfortable with unexpected changes in established patterns. When someone who was reliably present suddenly isn't, it triggers a cascade of psychological responses: concern, confusion, re-evaluation, and often a new appreciation for what was previously taken for granted. Drop "silence speaks volumes" in the comments if you've ever noticed how powerful strategic silence can be in your own interactions. This strategic absence serves a deeper purpose, what I call strategic starvation. When you make yourself less available, you're essentially starving others of something they've grown accustomed to: your influence, your information, your energy. And here's the revelation that changes everything. This isn't weakness or retreat. It's a calculated decision that deprives others of the certainty and comfort they've come to expect from your presence. The transformation happens on a fundamental psychological level. The less others can find you, the less they can touch you, emotionally, mentally, strategically. You create distance, not as an escape, but as a position of strength. This practice requires a mindset shift, from viewing absence as avoidance to recognizing it as a powerful stance that commands attention precisely because you're not demanding it. Behind the scenes of this dynamic lies what psychologists might call the vacuum effect. When people cannot predict your next move or easily locate your presence, their minds begin working overtime, creating scenarios and possibilities that often make you far more formidable in their imagination than you might be in reality. This is the psychology of absence at work. The less information people have about you, the more they fill in the gaps with projections, often granting you more power, mystery, and capability than you might actually possess. Subscribe now to join our community of strategic thinkers and gain access to psychological techniques that will change how people respond to you forever. Machiavelli understood this principle centuries ago when observing that rulers who were rarely seen by the public carried greater weight and impact when they did appear. Their presence became an event rather than an expectation. The same principle applies in personal dynamics. When your presence becomes selective rather than guaranteed, each appearance carries significantly more influence. The journey toward mastering this approach takes us to creating what amounts to a personal mythology through strategic absence. True disappearance isn't announced with dramatic declarations or lengthy explanations about where you're going or why. Those are performances that invite negotiation and undermine the power of your absence. Instead, the most effective disappearance is quiet and surgical: conversations left unanswered, invitations declined without explanation, spaces vacated without fanfare. In this approach, silence itself becomes the message, creating a void that others rush to fill with their own interpretations. And during that silence, during that apparent absence, you're not actually idle. You're working in shadow, developing yourself, advancing your position, and returning sharper and stronger than when you left. This creates a fascinating impact on how others perceive you. When you reappear after a period of strategic absence, people often attribute your return to something meaningful, even if you haven't explicitly stated a reason. They create narratives about where you've been and what you've been doing, often granting you more significance than if you had remained constantly present. Write strategic absence in the comments if you're beginning to see how this powerful dynamic plays out in real-world relationships. This gradual transformation through strategic absence eventually leads to something even more powerful. You become what I call a living myth. Extended absence transforms you from merely being a person into being a concept that exists partly in reality and partly in the minds of others. In this elevated state, people begin speculating about your motives, assigning meanings to your actions, and debating your thoughts when you're not even present to influence the conversation. The breakthrough insight here is that myths cannot be touched or controlled in the way ordinary people can. A myth lives partly in reality and partly in imagination, making it inherently more powerful than either alone. All the while, you maintain control over the only element that truly matters: when and how you choose to reappear. This dimension of influence operates beneath conscious awareness for most people. They don't realize they're participating in your mythology. They simply find themselves thinking about you, wondering about you, speculating about you in ways they don't do with others who maintain constant, predictable presence. When you finally return after a strategic absence, the shift in others' behavior is immediate and unmistakable. The revelation occurs in real time. They measure their words more carefully, watch for subtle signs of your approval or disapproval, and remain uncertain about what might trigger your next disappearance. This uncertainty becomes the invisible leash in the relationship dynamic, and you hold it. The mindset required to master this approach isn't about craving power over others. It's about reclaiming power over yourself that most people unconsciously surrender. It requires the courage to step back when others expect you to step forward, to remain silent when others expect you to speak, and to withhold when others expect you to give. Behind the scenes of all these dynamics lies what might be the most valuable currency in human interaction: indifference. Not cruelty, not coldness, but genuine freedom from needing approval, validation, and acknowledgement. The uncomfortable truth most never confront is that the moment someone knows you crave their attention, you've already surrendered your power in the relationship. Think about the transformation that occurs when you truly don't need what others offer. Their praise no longer elevates you. Their criticism no longer diminishes you. Their absence no longer disturbs you. You've created an internal ecosystem that generates its own validation rather than requiring external inputs. This isn't about becoming heartless, it's about becoming self-contained. Most people move through their lives as emotional reactors, constantly responding to external stimuli, their internal state shifting with every positive or negative interaction. The journey toward becoming someone others can't stop thinking about requires developing genuine indifference to these external validations. Comment: self-contained power. If you recognize how much strength comes from not needing external validation to maintain your sense of worth. This principle of indifference connects directly to what I call the law of need, one of the most transformative insights in human psychology. Simply put, the person who needs least always controls the one who needs most. This fundamental truth governs countless interactions, yet few ever consciously recognize it. When someone attempts to bait you with insults, provoke envy, or withhold attention to make you chase them, the most powerful response isn't to engage, but to give them nothing. This isn't passive resistance as most understand it, it's active denial of their power tactics. It's recognizing the hidden truth that every attempt to manipulate you requires your participation to succeed. When you refuse to participate, not from spite, but from genuine detachment, you disrupt the entire dynamic they were counting on. The mindset behind this approach requires a fundamental shift in how you view interaction. Most people operate from a position of emotional hunger, constantly seeking validation, approval, attention, and confirmation. This hunger creates vulnerability that others can easily exploit. The journey toward becoming magnetically intriguing begins with addressing this hunger at its source, rather than constantly seeking to satisfy it. Behind the scenes of most manipulative interactions is a simple transaction. Someone offers you something you crave, approval, attention, validation, in exchange for your compliance, emotional reaction, or surrender of boundaries. When you no longer crave these external inputs, you become what might be called unpurchasable, perhaps the rarest quality in today's hyper-connected, validation-hungry world. This form of independence creates a fascinating paradox. The less you can be influenced through normal social currency, the more magnetic you become to others. People are instinctively drawn to what they cannot easily affect or control. Your immunity to common forms of social manipulation doesn't repel others. It intensely attracts them, often without them understanding why. This attraction isn't superficial. It operates at a primal level of human psychology. We are programmed to value what we cannot easily obtain, to respect what we cannot easily influence, and to pursue what we cannot take for granted. The revelation that ties these principles together is what Machiavelli might call psychological deterrence, perhaps the most sophisticated form of personal power. The strongest defense against unwanted influence isn't creating walls or wielding weapons. It's establishing the perception of potential consequence without ever having to specify what that consequence might be. When people believe that approaching you inappropriately, disrespecting your boundaries, or attempting manipulation could cost them something they value, status, comfort, connection, peace, they approach with natural hesitation. This hesitation represents your victory before the interaction has even begun. The impact of this approach is profound. You don't need to openly threaten or intimidate. In fact, doing so would undermine the effect entirely. Instead, your composed demeanor, selective attention, strategic absence, and unpurchasable nature naturally create an aura that makes others pause before stepping carelessly into your space. Comment: boundaries without battles. If you recognize how establishing the right perception eliminates the need for constant confrontation. This psychological deterrence highlights what I call the paradox of intimidation, one of the most counterintuitive discoveries about human influence. When someone displays open aggression or explicit intimidation, they don't create respect, they create resistance. Such obvious power moves inevitably invite challenge and devolve into contests of pride where both sides feel compelled to defend their position. The revelation here is that subtle, unspoken deterrence accomplishes what loud intimidation never can. It leaves nothing specific to challenge, only something intangible to respect. Quiet power resonates at a frequency that bypasses conscious resistance. This isn't manipulation, it's understanding the architecture of human psychology and working with it rather than against it. The transformation toward this kind of presence requires mastering three specific elements with absolute precision: your words, your expressions, and your silences. Your words become measured, intentional, and never excessive. You speak with purpose rather than from compulsion. Your expressions remain controlled and somewhat unreadable, not blank or robotic, but carefully modulated to reveal only what serves your intention. And perhaps most powerfully, your silences become weaponized, comfortable for you, but distinctly uncomfortable for others. The journey toward embodying this presence creates a fascinating effect. People begin to pause before approaching you, not because you've erected explicit barriers, but because they sense something in your demeanor that makes them instinctively recalibrate their approach. This isn't about becoming intimidating in the conventional sense. It's about cultivating presence that commands consideration. Behind the scenes of this approach lies a crucial distinction that separates those who merely imitate power from those who genuinely possess it. The key insight is that you cannot fake an untouchable presence. You must authentically embody it. This requires internal alignment that can only come from dedicated inner work, detaching from unnecessary attachments, building genuine independence from others' approval, and developing the discipline to respond based on principle rather than emotional impulse. This mindset reflects one of the most profound hidden truths about personal influence. True power isn't performed, it's cultivated. It grows naturally from a foundation of self-possession that most never develop because the work required feels too uncomfortable. The decision to embrace this discomfort is what separates those who merely wish for impact from those who actually create it. What emerges from this cultivation is unshakable confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. It simply exists as part of your natural state. This confidence isn't arrogance, it's certainty in your boundaries, clarity in your values, and comfort with both your capabilities and limitations. It's the quiet knowledge that your worth isn't determined by others' assessment of you. Type internal alignment in the comments if you recognize that true influence starts with aligning your inner world before attempting to influence the outer one. What truly transforms your interactions with others is something that happens naturally once you've cultivated this presence long enough. People begin approaching you differently, with noticeably more respect, consideration, and thoughtfulness. They think twice before casually asking for your time or testing your boundaries. The revelation here is that trouble stops finding you not because the external world has suddenly become kinder or more respectful, but because you've fundamentally altered how others calculate the risk-to-benefit ratio of challenging you. This shift represents one of the most profound mindset transformations available to anyone willing to do the inner work. The world responds differently to you because you've changed the invisible calculations happening in other people's minds. Without explicitly threatening consequences, without creating conflict, you've established a presence that naturally deters casual disrespect or intrusion. Behind the scenes of this dynamic lies what might be called the shield of perception, perhaps the highest form of personal defense available to anyone. This shield manifests when others decide, entirely on their own, that challenging you simply isn't worth whatever undefined consequences might follow. The journey toward this state represents a complete inversion of how most people approach conflict. Instead of winning battles, you prevent them from occurring in the first place. This approach creates a fascinating paradox. You win before battles even begin, because the fight never comes to you. Your presence itself becomes the deterrent, creating a protective field around you that requires no active maintenance or explicit boundaries. People intuitively sense the field and adjust their behavior accordingly, often without conscious awareness that they're doing so. The impact of this shift cannot be overstated. You conserve enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy that would otherwise be spent defending yourself, explaining yourself, or recovering from boundary violations. This reclaimed energy becomes available for creative pursuits, deeper connections, and personal development. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how scarcity plays a crucial role in creating this magnetic presence. In a world absolutely drowning in noise, constant messages, notifications, updates, and demands for attention, the rarest commodity has become absence. The less you give of yourself, the more valuable your presence becomes when you do choose to give it. This principle of strategic scarcity operates on a fundamental level of human psychology that most never consciously recognize. By carefully limiting access to your time, attention, emotional energy, and physical presence, you transform yourself from something forgettable into something unforgettable. This isn't about playing games or being manipulative. It's about recognizing the true value of what you're offering and ensuring that it's properly valued by those who receive it. Comment: strategic. A value If you've noticed how the things you make scarce in your life tend to become the things others value most from you. This strategic scarcity naturally transforms your interactions in another profound way. When you control access to yourself, your presence stops being routine and becomes an event. Think about that distinction for a moment. Events command attention, preparation, and respect in ways that routine occurrences never do. Most people never experience this transformation because they've become what I call addicts of availability, throwing themselves into every interaction, responding to every message immediately, accepting every invitation, as if their worth depends on being constantly seen and acknowledged. The revelation that changes everything is understanding the fundamental difference between being valued and being available. These are not only different qualities, they're often inversely related. The mindset shift required here challenges one of our most deeply held assumptions, that being constantly present and accessible strengthens connections. The uncomfortable truth is that constant presence doesn't build connection, it builds complacency. This represents one of the most counterintuitive discoveries about human psychology. People stop valuing what's always available to them. They stop working to maintain what they believe can never be lost. This isn't manipulation, it's recognizing the reality of how human attention and appreciation naturally function. The journey toward becoming someone others can't stop thinking about requires embracing this paradox rather than fighting against it. Behind the scenes of every magnetic personality lies a carefully cultivated balance between presence and absence, between giving and withholding. This balance isn't accidental, it's engineered with intention and awareness. The transformation happens across three distinct domains that, when aligned, create an irresistible aura of intrigue. First, physical scarcity. Deliberately limiting your physical availability, attending only what truly matters to you, and leaving when your presence has made its maximum impact, not when others are finished with you. Notice how differently people treat those who are selective about where they appear versus those who show up everywhere they're invited. Second, digital scarcity, perhaps even more important in our hyper-connected era. This means creating deliberate space between demands and replies, forcing others to value your attention rather than expect it on demand. The decision to check messages on your schedule rather than jumping at every notification isn't rudeness, it's reclaiming sovereignty over your attention. Third, emotional scarcity, guarding your inner world like the valuable vault it is. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, feelings, fears, and desires. When you share selectively rather than indiscriminately, what you do share carries exponentially more weight and significance. The impact of engineering scarcity across these domains creates a fascinating shift in how others perceive and respond to you. Their attention sharpens when you're present precisely because your presence isn't guaranteed. Write "reclaiming my attention" in the comments if you're ready to stop being constantly available to others and start valuing your own presence as the gift it truly is. This strategic approach of cultivated scarcity creates another powerful effect that most never anticipate, what I call the filter of unavailability. When you commit to this path, something fascinating happens naturally. Those who valued you only for convenience, only for what they could easily extract from you, gradually drift away. This isn't a loss, it's a revelation that transforms your social landscape. What emerges from this natural filtering process is a smaller but significantly stronger circle of people who treat your time and attention with the respect they deserve. The quality of your interactions improves dramatically because you're no longer surrounded by those seeking easy access without offering equivalent value in return. This refinement process reveals a hidden truth about human connection. Depth often requires sacrifice of breadth. The transformation in how others perceive you extends even further through what might be the most counterintuitive discovery in social dynamics, the magnetic paradox. Simply put, the harder you are to reach, the more people want to reach you. The less frequently you show up, the more they anticipate and value your arrival when you do. This isn't manipulation or playing games. It's a fundamental reprogramming of the social equation. Think about the journey this creates in the minds of others. In a world where almost everyone is screaming for attention, constantly visible, perpetually available, the one who holds back naturally stands out. The one who moves with intention rather than desperation creates a gravitational pull that others can't help but notice and respond to. Behind the scenes of this dynamic lies a primal recognition. What's rare becomes valuable simply by virtue of its scarcity. This principle operates whether we acknowledge it or not. The decision to work with this reality rather than against it represents one of the most significant mindset shifts available to anyone seeking to increase their impact and influence. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring a powerful metaphor that encapsulates this approach. Strategic scarcity doesn't mean complete isolation or disconnection. It means you move through the world like a storm, not always present, but always possible. People respect storms not because they're constantly overhead, but because they know storms can appear without warning, change everything in their path, and disappear just as quickly. When you embody this force, this capacity to arrive with impact, create meaningful change, and depart on your own terms, you transform how others relate to you. They become aware of your potential presence even during your absence. They prepare for your arrival rather than take it for granted. They remember what you said, what you did, and how you made them feel long after you've gone. The impact of becoming this storm-like presence extends beyond specific interactions into your broader identity in the minds of others. You become something that defies easy categorization, something that commands respect not through demand, but through sheer presence. Write storm presence in the comments if you're ready to transform from someone who's always available into a force that appears with purpose, creates impact, and leaves a lasting impression. This storm-like presence naturally connects to another dimension of magnetic influence, what I call controlled unpredictability. The revelation that transforms how others perceive you is understanding that power lies not only in strength, but in being unreadable. Most people live in patterns so obvious, so predictable, that anyone paying attention can map their vulnerabilities with ease. They react the same way to the same triggers, appear in the same places at the same times, and make decisions according to the same visible criteria. The mindset shift that creates extraordinary influence is recognizing that predictability itself becomes a vulnerability. When others can anticipate your every move, they can prepare for it, counter it, or manipulate it to their advantage. This insight reveals an uncomfortable truth. A mind that can be anticipated is a mind that can be manipulated. Your predictability essentially becomes a blueprint that others can use to understand where you're most vulnerable and when. The transformation begins when you make the decision to destroy this blueprint through calculated shifts in your patterns. Not random or chaotic changes, but strategic variations that maintain your overall direction while keeping others uncertain about your specific moves. Behind the scenes of this approach is a sophisticated balance between consistency and variation. You're not erratic or unreliable. You're strategically unpredictable in ways that serve your larger purpose. This creates a fascinating psychological effect where others recognize your general trajectory but can never be entirely certain about your specific choices or reactions. The journey toward mastering this approach happens across three Distinct domains of unpredictability, each creating a different dimension of intrigue. First, varying your movements so you're not always in the same places at the same predictable times. Second, altering your responses so others never know with certainty which approach will work with you. Sometimes you engage, sometimes you withdraw, never in a pattern they can map. Third, occasionally making decisions that surprise others' expectations without contradicting your core principles. The impact of this controlled unpredictability creates something remarkable, a sense of potential consequence without requiring explicit threats or aggressive action. People approach you with natural caution, not because you've intimidated them, but because they cannot fully predict how you'll respond. This isn't about becoming completely inscrutable. It's about retaining sovereignty over your own patterns rather than allowing others to map and exploit them. The difference between someone who can be easily manipulated and someone who maintains their autonomy often comes down to this single quality: controlled unpredictability. What makes this approach particularly powerful is that it works silently, beneath conscious awareness. Most people don't realize they're responding differently to you because they can't predict you. They simply feel a natural caution and respect that emerges from that uncertainty. Write "pattern breaker" in the comments if you're beginning to see how strategic unpredictability creates a natural shield against manipulation. When you combine the power of unpredictability with strategic scarcity, something truly remarkable emerges. What I call the phantom presence. This transformation takes you beyond merely being an interesting person to becoming a constant presence in others' minds, even when you're physically absent. They know you exist, but have no idea when, how, or why you might appear next. This uncertainty creates a fascinating psychological effect, an ongoing awareness of your potential influence that persists even when you're not actively present. The revelation here is that you've essentially programmed others to think about you without needing to do anything to trigger that thought. Your previous strategic appearances and disappearances, your unpredictable responses, your selective availability, all combine to create a shadow of your presence that remains active in their psychology long after you've gone. This represents one of the most profound manifestations of influence, occupying mental real estate without requiring continuous input. Behind the scenes of this dynamic lies a fundamental insight about human psychology. We remain fixated on what we cannot fully predict or possess. The mind naturally returns to unresolved patterns, unanswered questions, and unpredictable forces. By embodying these qualities, you become something the mind cannot easily categorize and dismiss. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring what might be the most sophisticated dimension of creating obsession: psychological anchoring. Every single interaction you have with someone leaves an emotional mark, a residue that lingers in their memory. Most people wander through their lives, allowing these impressions to form completely by accident, shaped by whatever emotions happen to be flowing through them in the moment. The mindset shift that creates extraordinary influence is recognizing that you can deliberately decide what emotional tone others will forever associate with you. This isn't manipulation, it's taking responsibility for the impression you create, rather than leaving it to chance. The decision to consciously shape how others remember you represents one of the most significant transformations in how you approach human interaction. This approach requires understanding a critical truth. What people remember when you're gone is often more powerful than anything you did when you were present. Memory becomes the primary territory where influence either grows or diminishes. By controlling the final impression, the emotional residue you leave behind, you control the story they tell themselves about you long after the interaction has ended. The journey toward mastering psychological anchoring culminates in one essential practice: controlling the exit. Never allow interactions to end naturally or on someone else's schedule. Instead, end them deliberately on your terms, with a decisive statement, a knowing smile, or a meaningful pause that reinforces exactly the impression you've chosen to leave behind. Write "memory architect" in the comments if you recognize how controlling the final impression shapes how others think about you long after you've gone. This strategic exit connects directly to what I call the cumulative effect of psychological anchoring. The revelation that transforms ordinary influence into something extraordinary is understanding that this isn't a one-time tactic or occasional technique. It's a cumulative process that builds with every interaction. Each encounter should layer the same core impression until it gradually becomes the primary lens through which others perceive you. Think about the journey this creates, with each interaction reinforcing the same carefully chosen qualities. You're essentially engineering your reputation from the ground up. What emerges from this consistent practice is something that functions as both weapon and armor, protecting you from mischaracterization while simultaneously extending your influence even when you're not present. The mindset required for this approach involves extraordinary patience and consistency. Most people constantly shift how they present themselves based on mood, circumstance, or audience. The transformation occurs when you decide on a core impression you want to leave, and then maintain that thread through every interaction, regardless of external variables. Behind the scenes of this cumulative anchoring lies a sophisticated technique that elevates your influence even further, what I call selective disruption. Once you've established a consistent impression over time, you gain access to an extraordinary tool, the strategic violation of that very expectation. If you've anchored yourself as perpetually calm and collected, a rare flash of cold intensity will hit with extraordinary impact, precisely because it contradicts everything they've come to expect from you. This selective disruption reveals another dimension of your control, that even your departures from pattern are intentional rather than reactive. This isn't inconsistency, it's a calculated decision to show another facet of yourself at exactly the moment when it will create maximum impact. The revelation here is that anchoring works in silence, without confrontation or explicit declaration. You don't have to argue for how you should be perceived, defend your reputation, or prove yourself. Through words, your actions, your presence, and your consistent emotional tone speak for you without requiring explanation or justification. Over time, this anchor becomes so deeply set in the minds of others that even your absence continues to influence the room. Your image remains active in their thinking, shaping how decisions are made, conversations flow, and dynamics unfold, all without requiring your physical presence or active input. Now I want to go deeper into understanding what all these principles ultimately create, what Machiavelli might have called the untouchable mind. This isn't just a collection of tactics or techniques, but a comprehensive blueprint for becoming someone whose mind cannot be touched, whose presence cannot be owned, and whose will cannot be bent. Through strategic implementation of these principles, you've essentially built walls, not to hide behind, but to clearly define the boundaries of access. You've transformed your absence into something more powerful than presence, your silence into something sharper than words, and your scarcity into a precious currency that others value highly. Drop untouchable presence in the comments if you're beginning to see how these principles can transform not just how others perceive you, but how you move through the world. As we've explored these principles of psychological influence, you've begun to see the outlines of something truly remarkable, a comprehensive approach to human interaction that transforms you from someone easily overlooked to someone impossible to forget, What you now understand about strategic absence, emotional control, and psychological anchoring places you among a rare few who recognize these hidden dynamics that govern human attention and obsession. This journey of transformation isn't about manipulating others. It's about reclaiming sovereignty over your own presence and the impact it creates. It's about understanding that your attention, your time, your emotional energy are precious resources that deserve to be valued accordingly. When you begin implementing these principles, even in small ways, you'll notice immediate shifts in how others respond to you. For those of you who've stayed with me through this exploration, I'd love to know which of these concepts resonated most deeply. Drop Machiavelli's student in the comments if you've made it to the end and found yourself reconsidering how you present yourself to the world. Your insights help me understand what aspects of psychological dynamics most intrigue you. If you found value in these revelations about human psychology, consider subscribing to join our community of strategic thinkers. Each video builds on these foundational principles, revealing new dimensions of influence and presence that most will never understand. And if this conversation sparked something in you, let me know with a like. It helps others discover these insights as well. I've created a video right here that takes these principles even deeper, exploring how to apply these exact same tactics in professional environments where strategic influence determines your trajectory. Click through and continue this journey with me there. Your perspective on social dynamics will never be the same.